Welcome to Silent Queen's Calling. I'm glad you're here. Now let's get into the story. She was standing at the reception desk of the hotel her husband owned when he told her to leave. Not quietly, not privately. In front of the concierge, two front desk clerks, and a couple checking in from Portland who would later leave a review mentioning, among other things, that the lobby had been the site of a domestic incident. He said it with the particular calm of a man who has rehearsed the moment and found his marks. He said, "Josephine, I need you to go." And when she did not move immediately, when she simply looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 11 years, the way a woman looks at a man when she is deciding how much of herself to spend on his failings, he leaned forward across the marble desk and lowered his voice to something that was not quite a whisper and said, "You don't work here anymore. You don't belong here anymore. We're done." Behind him, standing near the entrance to the bar, was a woman named Kendall. She was 31. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne, and she was watching Josephine the way people watch house fires from a safe distance. With interest, with a kind of clinical remove. She did not look guilty. She looked like she had already redecorated. Josephine picked up her bag. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. She looked at the couple from Portland who had frozen mid-signature at the check-in pad, and she said, "I hope you enjoy your stay." Then she walked out through the revolving door into the October cold without her coat, which was still in the office upstairs, and which she would never retrieve, and which did not matter. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The wind off the harbor was sharp. Traffic moved past in the ordinary way. Traffic moves past people whose lives have just been restructured. She put one hand in her jacket pocket and felt, by habit, for the small brass key she had carried for 9 years. It was still there. A skeleton key, old, worn smooth at the edges, engraved with a set of initials that were not hers, but belonged to the woman who had given it to her, her grandmother, Louisa Vane Pemberton, who had died at 92. With more clarity and fewer regrets than anyone Josephine had ever known, she held the key for 3 seconds. Then she took out her phone and made a call. Her name was Josephine Pemberton Holt, to her husband, to his family, to the staff of the Holt Meridian Hotel Group, to every person in the comfortable, moneyed world she had spent 11 years navigating on her husband's behalf. She was simply Josie, Josie who handled the charity events, Josie who remembered the staff birthdays and the dietary restrictions of the repeat guests and the names of the investors' children. Josie who was always there and always capable and never the most important person in the room and who seemed, from the outside, to prefer it that way. What none of them knew, what she had spent 11 years allowing them not to know, was that Josephine Pemberton Holt was born Josephine Vane Pemberton, the only grandchild of Louisa Vane Pemberton, and the sole heir to the Pemberton Trust, a private family estate with holdings in commercial real estate, a portfolio of regional newspapers, a controlling interest in a mid-Atlantic shipping operation, and 47 years of compounding investment returns, managed by a family office so discreet it did not have a website. Forbes had never attempted to estimate the Pemberton Trust's value. The family had not been in Forbes. The family had been in rooms where Forbes did not get invitations. Josephine had grown up inside that world the way trees grow inside walled gardens, shaped by the pressure of the boundary even when the boundary is invisible. By 15, she could read a room. By 20, she had learned that the room almost always wanted something from her, and that the something was almost never her. It was the name. It was the trust. It was access to the rooms behind the rooms. Her grandmother had understood this with a matter-of-fact clarity of a woman who had lived long enough to watch it happen to 3 generations of Pemberton women. She did not offer comfort. She offered strategy. She sat across from Josephine at the kitchen table of the family's Connecticut house the summer. Josephine turned 22 and said, in the direct, unhurried way she said most things, "The mistake the women in this family make is announcing themselves too early. A key shown at the wrong door is just a target." Then she pressed the brass skeleton key into Josephine's palm and closed her fingers around it. "When you find the right door," she said, "you won't need to announce anything. The lock will turn on its own." Josephine had carried the key since that morning. She had carried it into graduate school, where she studied hotel management under her mother's maiden name, Vane, because the Pemberton name opened too many doors before she had a chance to see which ones were worth opening. She graduated at the top of her program. She took a job at a boutique hotel in Annapolis, entry-level, floor operations, because she wanted to understand the actual work before she understood the financials. She was 24. She drove a used Subaru. She wore her hair in a braid because it stayed out of her face during a shift. She ate dinner at the staff table and learned to fix a jammed ice machine and memorized the names of every housekeeper on the morning rotation. Her grandmother approved. Her grandmother said, "A woman who knows how a place runs can never be told she doesn't understand how it works." She met Garrett Holt at an industry conference in Baltimore when she was 26. He was 34. He was building his first hotel, a converted warehouse on the harbor waterfront. And he was the kind of man who talked about the building the way other men talk about their children, with obsessive, almost embarrassing affection. He described load-bearing walls and reclaimed oak flooring and the specific quality of light through industrial windows at 4 in the afternoon. And he was, Josephine thought, genuinely in love with the thing he was making. She performed her usual assessment. She had been doing it since 15. It took longer than usual. Garrett Holt was difficult to read. He was ambitious, but his ambition had a quality she had not encountered in the men who had wanted her name and her access. It was attached to something, not to money as an abstraction, but to the specific physical act of building a place where people came and felt held by it, where the light and the materials and the design and the service added up to an experience of being, temporarily, cared for. She watched him for 3 months before she agreed to dinner. She watched how he treated the tradespeople on his job site. She watched him talk to his investors, who were modest, regional, and loyal. She watched him lose a contract he had wanted badly and absorb the loss without taking it out on anyone near him. She watched him replace a kitchen manager he had promoted too quickly, and do it with enough decency that the man sent him a text 2 weeks later saying he understood. She was not in love with him yet, but she respected him, and she had spent enough years watching people confuse the two that she understood respect as the more durable foundation. They married 3 years later. Small ceremony. Josephine's grandmother attended, assessed Garrett with 12 minutes of focused conversation, and said afterward, in the car, "He'll do." This was from Louisa Vane Pemberton, an expression of profound approval. The marriage began as a partnership and functioned as one for the first 4 years. Josephine brought organizational precision and operational instinct that Garrett openly acknowledged and visibly valued. She built systems. She hired staff with the careful attention of a woman who understood that a hotel is only as good as the people who make the beds and answer the phones. And remember that Mr. Okafor takes his coffee with oat milk and no sugar. She designed the loyalty program. She managed the community relationships. She handled the charity wing, which she built into something that mattered, and not just something that looked good at year-end. Garrett built the rooms and the brand and the investor relationships. They worked. Then the Meridian acquisition happened. Garrett's company went from 1 hotel to 4 in 18 months, which is the kind of growth that tests the integrity of everything underneath it. The financial pressure compressed people. It revealed what they were made of. What Garrett was made of, under the compression, turned out to be something different from what Josephine had believed. She was watching all those years. He became a man who needed to be the largest thing in any room he entered. He became a man for whom other people's competence was a variable to be managed, rather than a resource to be grateful for. He became, quietly and then loudly, a man who did not need a partner. He needed an audience and a support system and a public-facing wife who made him look grounded, and who did not require in return to be seen. Josephine noticed. She filed the observations in the part of herself that her grandmother had trained, the part that watched and waited and did not act until the picture was complete, the part that had been watching for 2 years when she found the texts. She was not looking for them. She was updating the shared calendar on Garrett's laptop because her own was being serviced, and she needed to check a meeting time. The texts were in an open browser tab, a messaging platform she did not recognize, and she saw Kendall's name, and she saw the content of 3 messages, and she understood, in the time it takes to read 27 words, the full shape of what had been happening. She did not close the tab immediately. She read the 3 messages. She read 2 more. She noted the dates, which went back 8 months. Then she closed the browser. She updated the calendar. She closed the laptop. She made dinner. She set the table for 2. She did not confront Garrett. She began to document. Over the following 6 weeks, she built a record with the methodical patience of a woman raised by someone who kept ledgers in 4 colors and said the difference between information and evidence is organization. Credit card statements she had access to through the joint account showed a pattern of charges at restaurants and hotels that matched the dates in the messages. A name search on the messaging platform, which she accessed once from a guest device and never again, confirmed that Kendall was Kendall Briggs, 31, a marketing consultant Garrett's firm had retained 8 months ago on a project basis. She took one afternoon and parked across the street from the office and watched Garrett leave at 5:15 with a woman who matched the photo on the marketing firm's website. They walked half a block before he took her hand. She documented everything: dates, locations, amounts. One photograph taken from a distance, clear enough to be definitive, filed in a folder on a cloud account connected to an email address Garrett had never seen. She did not cry. She felt something she had no precise word for, something that was the opposite of surprise. A confirmation. The way a diagnosis feels when you have already suspected the illness for long enough that the official name is almost a relief. She had hidden her identity to find a man who loved her for herself. She had found a man who loved her for what she produced. And when what she produced was no longer the primary thing he wanted, he had found an additional source without pausing to consider what it would mean when she found out, which suggested that he did not believe she would find out, which suggested that he had, at some point in the past 11 years, stopped considering her a person with that kind of capacity. Her grandmother had said, "The key shown at the wrong door is just a target." Josephine had been the key, and Garrett had used her to open every door he needed and then left her in the lock. The hotel incident was not spontaneous. She understood that later. The timing, the public location, the presence of Kendall in the bar behind him, it had been staged, not for Josephine's benefit, for Garrett's. He had wanted a confrontation on his own ground, in a space where he was the owner and she was, on paper, just a former director of operations, whose title had been quietly reclassified 6 months ago, when the board had agreed to restructure management. She had noticed the restructuring. She had not mentioned that she noticed. She left the hotel on a Tuesday afternoon in October without her coat and without raising her voice, and without giving Kendall Briggs the satisfaction of a reaction she could describe at dinner. She walked 2 blocks to a parking garage. A car was waiting for her. The driver was a man named Charles, who worked for her grandmother's estate, and who had driven Josephine to various appointments for 9 years, and had never asked questions, because he understood that the questions were not his to ask. He opened the rear door. She got in. The door closed. The car moved into traffic. Garrett did not know she had taken a car from the parking garage. He did not know about Charles. He did not know about the apartment on Newbury Street that Josephine had maintained for 8 years under the Vane name, a 2-bedroom with a home office and a guest room that she had used, periodically, as a place to think. He did not know about a great many things. This was, as it turned out, a structural problem for Garrett Holt. By 9 o'clock that night, 3 things were in motion. The first was a call to Edmund Chow, who had been the Pemberton Trust lead attorney for 22 years, and who had the particular manner of a man who had seen most categories of disaster and found them manageable. She told him what had happened. She told him what she had documented. She told him what she wanted. He said, "I'll have a team assembled by 8 tomorrow morning." He paused. "Are you all right?" She said yes. He believed her. He had known her long enough to know the difference between yes as performance and yes as fact, and this was fact. The second was a conversation with Miriam Holloway, who was not in the family file or the trust structure or any document Garrett had ever seen, because Miriam Holloway was Josephine's grandmother's oldest friend and a retired federal judge who made introductions with the calm efficiency of a woman who kept a very accurate mental Rolodex and had been waiting, for some time, to be useful to Josephine in exactly this way. Miriam knew 3 people on the board of the bank where the Holt Meridian Group carried its primary credit line. She had not mentioned this to anyone. She mentioned it now. The third was a phone call to her grandmother. Louisa Vane Pemberton answered on the second ring, which was not as fast as the first, but was, from a 90-year-old woman, a statement of priority. "It's over," Josephine said. A pause. Not the pause of someone surprised. The pause of someone who had been expecting this call and was choosing their first words with care. "Are you safe?" "Yes. Where are you?" "Newbury Street." "Good." Another pause. "What did he do exactly?" Josephine told her. The restructuring, the texts, the documentation, the hotel lobby. Kendall Briggs, standing near the bar in a champagne silk blouse, watching Josephine be dismissed from a space she had spent 7 years helping to build. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it. The silence of a woman calculating, The trust has reviewed its discretionary holdings twice in the past year, Louisa said. There are 3 assets in the metropolitan area that intersect with Holt Meridian's credit exposure. I didn't act on them because I was waiting for you to make a decision. I've made it. Then I'll speak to the family office in the morning. A pause. Josephine. Yes, you were not wrong to try. You were wrong to stay as long as you did. Those are different kinds of wrong, I know. The key was always yours. It was never his. She hung up. Josephine sat in the apartment by the window and watched the street below, and felt the particular clarity that comes when a decision that has been forming for a long time finally solidifies completely. Not peace, exactly. Something more functional than peace. Alignment. The sensation of a person whose inside and outside have stopped contradicting each other. She did not sleep. She planned. By the following Thursday, the architecture of what came next had taken shape. The legal team had filed a divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences, supported by documentation that Edmund Chow described as thorough, in a tone that suggested he meant extraordinary. The financial disclosure attached to the petition itemized 11 years of contributions Josephine had made to the household and the business, including 3 specific instances in which disbursements from her personal account, an account connected, through a subsidiary layer, to the Pemberton Trust, had covered operating shortfalls at Holt Meridian during quarters when the expansion had outrun its cash flow. She had records for all of it. She had always had records for all of it. Her grandmother had taught her that documentation is care, that the people who do not keep records are the ones who end up unable to prove what they built. The forensic accountant the trust retained completed a preliminary review of Garrett's personal financials in 4 days. What they found was not complicated. What they found was a man who had been, for the past 3 years, living at approximately 30% beyond his liquid means, sustained by a combination of revolving credit, deferred compensation structures that were now under review, and the invisible financial engineering of a wife he had stopped noticing was doing it. The Newbury Street apartment was in Josephine's name alone. The car she drove was in the Vane Trust. The investment account she maintained separately had appreciated to a figure that would require Garrett's attorney to sit down when he read it. He would read it soon. The 4th hotel in the Holt Meridian Group, the Annapolis property that was Garrett's current flagship project, was under construction. The construction loan was held by a regional lender, whose largest depositor was a private foundation, administered by a woman named Helena Cross. Helena Cross was Louisa Vane Pemberton's estate attorney. Helena Cross had been the largest depositor at that bank for 19 years. Josephine did not call in any favors. She did not make any calls at all. She simply allowed the situation to exist, as it had always existed, and waited for the consequences of Garrett's choices to reach him through ordinary channels. It took 11 days for him to notice she was gone. Not that she had left. He had watched her leave. But he noticed the absence of what she had been doing, only when the doing stopped. The household accounts, which ran on an automated system Josephine had built and maintained, were linked to an account she had closed the morning after the lobby. The auto drafts failed. The cleaning service, which Josephine had retained and paid and rescheduled for 7 years, received a cancellation notice she sent from the Newbury Street apartment on a Wednesday morning with a cup of coffee in her other hand. The dry cleaning pickup, which had run like clockwork on Tuesdays, stopped running. The dinner reservation system she had maintained, through which she booked client dinners and networking events on Garrett's behalf, using a template she had spent a year refining, went dark. The contact database, which she had built and cross-referenced and updated quarterly, lived on a drive she had administered. It was no longer accessible. Garrett called her twice. Both calls went to voicemail. She did not listen to the voicemails. She had Edmund's team monitoring communications. Edmund summarized. The first message was confused. The second was angry in the way men get angry, when they have encountered consequences they were not expecting, and have decided the consequences are someone else's fault. His mother called next. Vivian Holt was a former interior designer from Charleston, who had spent 30 years cultivating the specific brand of gracious authority that Southern women of her generation wield like architecture. She had always been pleasant to Josephine in the way that a woman can be pleasant to someone she has decided does not require her full attention. She had been charming at the wedding and warm at the dinners, and had twice called Josephine resourceful in a tone that converted the compliment into something smaller. Vivian called Edmund's office to request a conversation with Josephine. Edmund's assistant told her that all communications were being routed through legal counsel. Vivian left a message with Edmund's assistant. The message was gracious and warm, and contained no acknowledgement of anything specific, and ended with an invitation to have lunch. Josephine sent a reply through Edmund. It said she appreciated Mrs. Holt's reaching out, and that for the time being, the legal process would need to complete its course. She did not feel anything particular when she sent this. She had expected Vivian's call. She had not expected anything from it. Garrett's sister Brooke texted Josephine's personal number, which Josephine had not changed because she wanted to see what people sent when they thought they still had access. Brooke's text said, "Josie, I know things have been intense. Garrett is really struggling. He misses you. I think if you two could just sit down and talk things through, there could be a real path forward. Also, I'm actually working on a pitch for an event series I'd love to get the Foundation's input on when you have a second." Josephine read the text. She did not respond. Brooke could contact the Foundation through the Foundation's website, the same as anyone else, the same as any stranger. Kendall Briggs lasted 5 weeks after Josephine left. She had entered the picture at a moment when Garrett Holt appeared to be a man ascending. 4 hotels, a growing brand, a polished professional life, a wife who handled the operational complexity so seamlessly it appeared not to exist. She had looked at his life the way you look at a hotel lobby, and assumed the hotel is well run because the lobby is beautiful. She had not looked behind the desk. What she found, once the lobby stopped maintaining itself, was a man who did not know his housekeeper's name, who had no system for managing his calendar, who was receiving collections calls on a credit card he had thought was being auto-paid, and who had, in the past month, missed 2 investor check-ins that Josephine had previously managed the scheduling and prep work for. He was not ascending. He was standing on an escalator that had stopped. The appearance of forward movement had been produced entirely by the machine beneath him. Kendall left on a Saturday. She did not make a scene. She simply did not come back after a weekend away, and sent a text that said she needed to prioritize her own professional growth right now. Garrett read it sitting at the kitchen island with a coffee he had made himself, because the housekeeper, as noted, was no longer coming. The Annapolis construction project stalled in the 7th week. The lender's review, which had been routine, became extended, which became a formal pause, which became a conversation about covenant compliance, that Garrett's CFO, who was also his college roommate and had been hired on the basis of that friendship, rather than the basis of his financial credentials, was not equipped to navigate. Garrett hired an outside advisor. The outside advisor identified 3 issues in the first 10 days. The issues were manageable but required immediate attention and renegotiation of terms that the lender, for reasons that were not entirely clear to Garrett, did not seem inclined to rush. He did not connect this to Josephine. Why would he? She was a hotel operations director. She managed events and staff and dinner reservations. The idea that his wife had any proximity to the financial architecture that governed his business was as available to his imagination as the idea that the cleaning service had been sustaining his professional image for 7 years. He had not thought about the cleaning service until the cleaning service stopped. The evening the gala invitation arrived, Garrett was eating takeout at the kitchen island and reading emails on his phone. The invitation was from the Pemberton Foundation, a name he vaguely recognized from charitable programs Josephine had mentioned over the years, the kind of detail he had filed as background noise. For an evening honoring the organization's 40th year of operation, to be held at the Whitmore Ballroom in the city's Arts District. It listed in the 2nd paragraph the evening's principal honoree. His eyes went to the name. They stopped there. He called Edmund Chow's office at 8 in the morning. Edmund did not take the call. His assistant conveyed that Mr. Chow was unavailable, and that communications regarding the pending matter should be conducted in writing through counsel. Garrett sat at his kitchen island for a long time. He sat there the way a man sits when the floor is shifted, and he has not yet decided whether to stand up or stay down. The Whitmore Ballroom held 300. Garrett counted approximately 280 on the evening of the gala. He had not been invited. He attended as the +1 of a mutual acquaintance, who he had called without any real plan, which was increasingly his mode of operation. He arrived early. He stood near the back bar and held a glass of water and watched the room fill with people he recognized in a new configuration. Business contacts of his, people who had attended events Josephine had organized on his behalf, people who had handed him cards at dinners that Josephine had booked and prepped and followed up on. They were here. They were here for this. They were here, it appeared, for her. The room changed when she walked in, not loudly, not with fanfare. A shift in attention, the subtle reorientation of a crowd toward a new center of gravity. She was wearing a dress the color of winter sky, fitted, precise, the kind of dress that has been made for one specific person, by someone who understood that person's proportions and bearing. The brass key hung at her collarbone on a chain. Her hair was down. She walked with a particular quality of movement that Garrett had always, he realized now, attributed to confidence without understanding its source. He had thought she was confident because she was capable. He understood now, watching her cross the ballroom floor toward the head table, that she was capable because she had always known, in the part of herself she had never shown him, exactly who she was. She did not look for him. She did not scan the room. She walked to her seat, the way a person walks into a room they have always belonged in. The foundation director introduced her. She spoke for 5 minutes. She spoke about the foundation's 40 years, and her grandmother's vision, and the kinds of work that do not generate headlines, but keep things running. She spoke about institutional memory. She spoke about the people who build systems and maintain them, and are thanked by having the systems attributed to the institution rather than to themselves. She said, "The invisible work is not invisible because it doesn't exist. It's invisible because the people who benefit from it prefer not to look." She did not look at Garrett while she said this. She did not need to. Every person in the room who had attended a Holt Meridian event, who had been welcomed by name at a Holt Meridian property, who had received a follow-up call after a meeting that Garrett had scheduled and not followed up on himself, understood, in the specific way that context supplies meaning, exactly what they were hearing. She returned to her seat. The room applauded. The director moved to the next portion of the program. Garrett moved through the crowd after the formal portion of the evening. He had no specific plan. He reached her orbit approximately 40 minutes after she had returned to the room following a cluster of conversations near the foundation's display. She was standing beside Miriam Holloway, who was 93 and small, and who looked at Garrett when he approached with an expression of complete assessment in approximately 4 seconds. "Josephine," he said. She turned. She looked at him with the expression she had used for 11 years on the floor of the hotel when something was not working, and she was deciding how to fix it. Calm, diagnostic, already past the problem. "Garrett, I didn't know," he said, "about any of this. I didn't know who your family was. I didn't know about the trust." Miriam excused herself with the unhurried grace of a woman who has exited inconvenient conversation since 1978 and returned to it regularly enough to have the technique memorized. Josephine looked at Garrett for a moment. She looked at him the way she had looked at him across the kitchen island. On the morning she had closed his laptop and made dinner, and set the table for 2 and not said a word. "I know you didn't know, Garrett. I'm not angry about that. I spent years making sure you didn't know, because I needed to understand who you were without the money in the room." She paused. "The problem isn't that you didn't know my family. The problem is that in 11 years, you never asked what I thought about much of anything. You never asked what I wanted for the business, or for myself, or for us. You watched me run your professional life and your household and your image, and you called it support and you called me capable. And you never once asked why a woman with my background was spending 11 years being invisible in someone else's story." She picked up her glass. "You didn't know because you weren't looking. That's the only thing I'm telling you to carry forward." She turned back toward the room. A woman from the foundation's board touched her arm, drawing her into a conversation. She turned toward it with the full attention she had always, Garrett now recognized, reserved for things that actually deserved it. He stood where she had left him for a moment. Then he walked back toward the bar. He did not stay for the rest of the evening. In the weeks after the gala, the things that had been destabilizing continued to resolve themselves in the direction they were already going. The Annapolis project was restructured at terms significantly less favorable than the original proposal. Garrett's CFO presented with a financial disclosure document in the divorce proceedings that outlined the full scope of Josephine's contributions to the business and the household, resigned to pursue other opportunities, which was how he put it in the email. Garrett's attorney reviewed the asset documentation and called him to say that the conversation they needed to have was going to take more than one session. Vivian Holt sent Josephine a letter, a physical letter, handwritten, 3 pages, on stationery. Josephine read it. It contained 4 apologies, each one more specifically articulated than the last, which suggested that Vivian had drafted and revised it, which was the most effort, Josephine thought, that Vivian had ever directed specifically at her. The 4th apology acknowledged, plainly, and without the architecture of plausible deniability, that had characterized most of Vivian's relationship with her daughter-in-law, that she had spent 11 years deciding that Josephine was not quite the right kind of woman for her son, without ever examining what that assessment was actually based on, and that she had been wrong, and that she understood if Josephine had no interest in continuing any kind of relationship. Josephine read the letter twice. She put it in a drawer. She did not respond immediately. She thought about it for several days and decided that honesty, this late and this specific, deserved acknowledgement, and wrote back a single paragraph that said she appreciated the letter, and that she was not interested in returning to the version of the relationship they had had, but that she was not uninterested in some different version that might become possible in time. She signed it Josephine Vane Pemberton, which was her legal name, the name on the trust, the name her grandmother had given her with a brass key and 40 years of considered wisdom. Brooke did not write a letter. Brooke sent another text 2 weeks after the gala that said, "Hey, saw the coverage of the foundation event. That was really impressive, Josie. Proud of you." Josephine read it and felt the particular texture of a compliment offered by someone who has decided, upon learning your value, to retroactively claim a supportive position they never held. She did not respond. Garrett called once more through Edmund's office. He wanted to know if there was any possibility, not of reconciliation exactly, but of a conversation. A real one. One that was not conducted through attorneys. Josephine was in Connecticut when she received this message. She was sitting on the back porch of her grandmother's house with a cup of tea and a wool blanket and the specific quality of autumn afternoon light that exists only in New England, and only for about 3 weeks, in which she had not allowed herself to experience in years because she had always been too busy managing something else. Louisa Vane Pemberton sat beside her in a garden chair with a cup of her own, watching 2 squirrels engaged in some territorial dispute near the bird feeder, with the same observational patience she brought to most things. Josephine relayed Garrett's message. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to tell him?" "That I've already forgiven him," Josephine said. "And that forgiveness doesn't mean the same thing as another chance." Louisa nodded once. "The squirrels resolved their dispute in favor of the larger one. Your grandmother's grandmother used to say," Louisa began, which was a construction she used, when she was drawing on something she had been thinking about for a long time, "that a woman who knows the worth of a thing doesn't have to argue about it. She just stops selling it at the wrong price." Josephine held her tea. The afternoon light moved through the trees. She thought about the lobby, the marble desk, Garrett's quiet and rehearsed calm, Kendall near the bar, the October cold on the sidewalk when she had walked out and not looked back. She thought about 11 years of dinners and calendars and staff schedules, and investor dinners and charity events, and the slow, careful work of building something from the inside that no one was meant to see her building. She thought about her grandmother's key, small, worn smooth, still in her pocket. She thought about the doors it had opened. "Tell Edmund," she said, "that I wish him well, and I'm not available for that conversation." The squirrel at the bird feeder flicked its tail once and moved on. Josephine put both hands around her cup and looked at the trees and at the light, and at the particular Sunday afternoon. Quiet of a place that had always known who she was, even when she had been busy letting someone else decide who she wasn't. She had come here to test the world. She had found the world unwilling to pass the test, and the world had suffered the consequences of that failure in the slow, structural way that things suffer when the person holding them together stops holding. She was not angry. She had been briefly in the weeks after the lobby, a clean, clarifying anger she had let herself feel fully and then set down. She was not sad, or not only sad. There was grief in the mornings sometimes, the kind that attaches to time rather than to a person. The feeling of 11 years waited and considered and then released. She was free. Free of the performance, free of the invisible architecture, free of the particular exhaustion of being capable in a room that never looked up to see who was keeping the lights on. She had hidden who she was to be loved for who she was. She had found instead a man who loved her for what she produced, and the thing she had produced, in the end, was the evidence that she had never needed him to see her, because she had always known how to see herself. The key in her pocket was small and worn, and worth nothing on the open market. It opened every door that mattered. That is what it means to be a silent queen, not the absence of power. The choice of when to use it, and the wisdom to know that the women who build the room in silence are not invisible. They are the room. And when they choose to walk out of it, the walls remember. If this story stayed with you, if it found something you've been carrying, or something you're ready to set down, subscribe and turn on notifications. At Silent Queens Calling, we tell stories for the ones who build in silence. The next one is already waiting for you.